In trying to understand more of the ancestral approach to health and wellness, I think Mary Ruddick takes the cake with somebody that can share so much and understands things at a much, much deeper level. So this conversation lays out topics from the quantum side without being too scientific, while giving real things to apply to our lives that make a massive difference. Mary, I am so excited to be visiting with you. Followed your work for a while. You were actually recommended to me from a follower, and so dove in there. Saw that you had done things with Bill Schindler and Ken Berry, and been on so many different podcasts. So I was pleasantly surprised to see how cool your work was. And so, if you don't care, give us that intro into how you got into looking at areas all over the world.
Oh, thank you. Well, let's see. One, it's very nice to be here. And two, I love those guys. And three, how I got into this. So I really got into researching around the world, and specifically traditional diets and what the health is like in these regions, out of curiosity. I grew up reading medical anthropology books, and, I work in the health field. I have a private practice, and I started to realize with speaking at so many conferences that I could take my practice remote long before, Zoom became a really big thing a few years ago. And so that gave me the freedom to go to many of these regions and see if any of these cultures were still very healthy and what they ate, and work remotely. So I've been doing that for now almost 8 years. I'm currently in Australia at the moment. And I really just loved it as I dove in. And I found that seeing it in person, and also studying the history of food and the history of cultures, really gives you an eagle-eye view rather than getting lost in the weeds, right? I think a lot of times with modern diets and protocols, we get lost in theory and ideas. But when you see things in practice, it really busts a lot of those open.
There's so much dogma and just kind of these tribalism that goes in, and I think it's really, really damaging for helping people. And so I came into all of the podcasts we do and the work we do based off of my son being diagnosed stage 4 cancer when he was 5, and so trying to question and figure out, what do we do, how do we overcome and do all these things. And nutrition was first, right? Like, it seemed like the number one thing that you could control and just kind of dive into. And I was blown away with how almost vile the different sides, whether it's carnivore, vegan, or this or that, right? But what I was always drawn to was more of that ancestral side, and what is working with cancer. And then the ancestral work of Weston A. Price, honestly, is what made the most sense to me. So what gets you excited about the ancestral approach versus diving into all carnivore, all vegan, or whatever the new hot thing is?
I'll be honest. I come from a healthy family. And so I didn't see most of the negatives that others do with the modern diet. And also, I knew quite a bit of history already and what people had eaten in different regions. And so it never made sense to me that people had to eat one thing, or that one way was better than the other. And also that we had to do things that were new, that hadn't been done before, in order to get healthy. That seemed very odd to me. But more than that, when I went through my own illness, the people that also healed from my illness and went into remission did it on very different diets, and ones that I had already tried. And so I really went into this to see and show that these camps don't need to fight so much, that there's a place and a time, and there's reasons why some things work for some people and not for others at different stages. It's very often timing.
Yeah. On some of the Blue Zone work you've done, I found it fascinating that instead of just taking it at face value, you go visit, you go live and interact and do all the things that they do on a daily basis. And so with the idea of local seasonal and natural, where where do those principles apply to all of us, regardless of where we are? And why do you think that they seem to really have such a positive impact on health?
I think it's actually one of the biggest things because there's a lot that we don't know. And there's a lot of levels of knowledge, and there's a lot that we're still discovering. Like, for instance, I've been spending about 40 hours a week for the last few weeks diving into what microbes produce what nutrients for us, right? I see a lot of across the board deficiencies, say the same 9 with the same condition. And usually there's 1 or 2 bacteria behind that are missing that should be producing those bacteria for us. So I've been really diving into all of that. And in that process, I of course go into traditional foods like natto and things like that. Well, yesterday I was working with someone who had been in Ayurveda for decades and is dealing with Parkinson's now. And I was talking to him about the traditional Indian diet. For one, it has really been missold. Each village is very different from each other because of the regional, right? They eat very, very regionally. Even when I'm in the Arctic, the diet from one village to the next is completely different, even though you would think, well, it's all snow. So why would it change? But it does. It's based on what animals are there and other things as well, how thick the ice is. So going back to India, it's a very high deuterium diet. There's a lot of plants, right? About 80% of the population right now consumes animal products. Only about 20% is vegetarian, vegetarian with dairy. But we think of the Indian diet as vegetarian. And so a lot of our concepts come in and we make these assumptions, right? So that's one area that we get wrong. Almost all the time. And then second is the issue with regionality that you're bringing up. So let's take the traditional Indian diet. Before the microbiome was damaged, before any of these things came into play, the diet was high deuterium. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, head back to the elemental table. Its nickname is heavy water. When you eat a lot of plants, it weighs down the cell. Now, that was never a problem in traditional societies because the traditional societies that would have a lot of deuterium in their diet, which, by the way, if it isn't cleared, you get chronic illness and all sorts of things. It's also linked to cancer and many other things. But all the traditional societies were in regions where the deuterium clears naturally. Right? One of the easiest way to clear deuterium is sunlight on the skin. And so when you're not covering your body with sunscreen, you're not covering it with clothing, you're not staying indoors all day, and you're in a sunny, warm place like India, granted, not all of India is sunny and warm, there are cold mountains, but for the most part, that's going to clear your deuterium, and those foods are not going to cause you a problem. But if you take that diet and you do it in, say, Canada, good luck. Right? So the
Yeah.
regionality is even more important than many of the things we often hear about the loss of vitamins and nutrients, the waxing and the preservatives put on the crops and the fruits and the vegetables to let them store and travel to the regions. It's far more than that, actually. And I wouldn't be surprised if we don't continue to discover much more in that area.
No, I love that you brought up deuterium. Actually, that's our group, our followers know all about deuterium. That has been a massive point of focus for us. So, with that, you also brought in sunlight, and that is something that I'm really trying to get kind of tease out, right? Because I don't think that that's something that we talk enough about. And so, let's go to say Greece and what you've experienced there in more of for a temperate Mediterranean climate, at least. What are they doing with sunlight? And if you can throw in what is like the water quality, because that's going to have a deuterium component to it. So sunlight, water, and how is that time spent throughout the day? Because I think something that we don't talk about enough on the problems with chronic disease in India are the fact that we have got all kinds of tech companies over there, and a lot of the population is working inside in blue screens, and now they have a high deuterium diet. It's a disaster. So let's contrast that to what you've experienced in Greece.
Greece, you're in the sun most of the time. It's really lovely. Everything is outdoors. And I should qualify that. But your restaurants, you sit outside under the trees, under umbrellas. So you walk a lot. I've never walked more than when I lived in Greece, and and it's lovely, right? You're walking in the sun, and you are swimming as well, which is important because you're swimming in salt water almost daily. Most people, and that's pretty normal for the population. But you get up, you have the light in your eyes. You then go out on your veranda. Every apartment in Greece has a porch, and air conditioning is not typically used. It's very rare. In fact, I got in living there for so long, I actually got almost repulsed from air conditioning. I never thought that would happen, but yes. So you're so used to the windows being open, and that has an effect as well on our microbiome and on our health and our circadian rhythm, because circadian rhythms are often triggered by sound. If any of you live on a farm or work on a farm, you'll know that the first animal that always wakes up is always the birds, right? It's the chickens. And they start chirping. Well, that is the case across all of nature. It is always the birds that wake up the other animals, and other animals wake us up. And we are set on that circadian rhythm, whether we're a night owl or a morning person, that is the one that we're supposed to be on. So the open windows really affects that as well. So you get the natural light almost all day because you've got the doors open, and there's always a breeze in the house going through. And so you're constantly, if you go to visit someone, you're going to sit on the porch, right? You're not going to sit inside. That's very unusual to sit inside. It can happen, but it's so rare. and when you go out to eat, you're going to sit outside. It's very normal to go and watch the sunset as well. So you're really part of the elements. And in fact, the real word for Greece is helios, which is sun, right? So when you're in Greece, they themselves don't call it Greece. They do that for us, but their flag is to represent the sun and the water as well. And at all ages, the folks are outdoors walking. So the elderly almost walk more than the youngsters, to be perfectly honest.
How cool. So what are they doing? Are they sourcing water more from rain or creeks or springs, or what does that look like? And I love the sun component because that just makes so much sense and kind of shows that maybe Jack Cruz might be onto something.
Oh, he's definitely, yeah, he's way ahead of his time. Yes. And I think if all of us fully understood what he was saying all the time, there would be a massive change much faster. The really, it's actually impressive what he talks about with quorum sensing is spot on. But the water, so you don't drink a lot in other countries. So water glasses are tiny, right? And that actually aids in hydration. You've got regulated vasopressin when you consume less water. So it's actually very helpful. Now, typically more, and this could just be my experience and the people that I know, so take this with a grain of salt, but in my several years of living there, the common thing to drink is fresh spring water that's naturally sparkling, and it comes from Mount Olympus, and it is delicious. You actually start craving it. It's very delicious. So that's going to be low deuterium, of course, right? It's coming from the mountains, and that is the classic drink. You don't drink too much still water. Some people do, but it's not typical, I would say.
Too cool. We'll go into that. Go into that not drinking a lot of water and why that's a big deal because I don't think a lot of people realize that the mitochondria produce water.
That's right. Yes. Yeah, that's exactly right. So in America, starting in about, I actually remember I was in high school, the late 90s, Gatorade and the electrolyte drinks started to get really pushed. You went from, you could use the water fountain between classes if you needed to suddenly everyone's carrying Nalgene bottles, right? These big Nalgene bottles, and you're chugging and you're drinking and you're adding things to your water so it tastes good and you can drink a lot. And you're telling your parents to drink more water, right? The things really shifted then. And at the same time, we started to see very increase in deaths in marathons and in sports in general, right? Track stars. I don't know if you remember this, but I remember seeing very unusual cases of like a very healthy girl dying at a track meet suddenly. A lot of these deaths were from a condition called being waterlogged, which is a nickname for having overhydration in the body, underhydration in the cell. We're seeing a lot of that. Some illnesses are classic for that. So encephalitis, many post-infection illnesses, especially in the immediate stage, are there. So whether it's post-Ebola or post-polio, even long COVID, those you tend to get this state first, and the people get very, very thirsty. You actually get much more thirsty when this is going on. And what we've done essentially is train our bodies to become resilient to water, to not absorb water. So the overconsumption that we've done has made us has increased our dehydration and decreased our ability to uptake hydration. So what does this mean? If you think about diabetes and insulin, it's not dissimilar, right? We've got too much of things not getting into the right place, right? It's bouncing off. Same thing with the hydration. And this causes a cascade of effects because our hydration affects our quality of life greatly, even if we don't go into the biochemistry. So take someone who is just 1 point off on sodium, too high or too low by 1 point. We would think by most lab results, that's not a big deal, right? A lot of things, if they're just a little bit out of range, it's okay. Not with hydration. You're going to feel like you're dying if that's the case. Same with potassium, same with magnesium. And so it's really affecting people's energy levels. And I think it's no coincidence that at the same time of us increasing our hydration very forcefully, we have also increased our incredible market for energy drinks, right? There's monsters and all of the name brand things I probably shouldn't list, all over the place, right? So it's affecting us in that way too, but it's not classic. When I go and stay with the indigenous tribes, they barely drink water. They're not dehydrated. They're actually more hydrated than us. They regulate their hydration better. And this is something you see across the board. So whenever something is done frequently, it tends to deregulate the system. Take snacking. That deregulated our hunger hormones, right? Or take consumption of sugar or consumption of water. We get deregulated when that happens. And so one of the best things to do is to start drinking a lot less, just having a sip when you're thirsty, not ignoring the body signals, but not chugging or doing what so many people are told and drinking a gallon or two of water a day. It's dangerous.
Yeah. So Mary, where does that balance come from with, say, electrolytes and other minerals? How do we get that in a more ancestrally appropriate diet? Is it something where we should just include salt, drink spring water? What are your recommendations on that?
Well, I don't know if there's anything that's been properly studied for that, but I can tell you what I see in practice. A good way to go, and also in the communities that I go to that live traditionally and eat traditionally, they do more broth. So when they're consuming a liquid, it's going to be more of a broth or a ferment, depending on the culture. So you can certainly start with that because those things have a lot of minerals in them typically. And so they're going to help you with hydration. If it's a ferment, it's also going to have probiotics, which can lead to the increase of certain amino acids and vitamins that can help you with hydration as well. So I would start with that. We don't know if the real increase in all the electrolytes and adding that to water is really helping. I can certainly say people feel better when they do that, and that's a good sign. Doing the natural mineral water is very good too. That's very different than the forced soda water. That's not hydrating, but not everyone can afford to do that, and you've got to lug the the glass bottles around. So you have to work with what you can. But one of the best things is to have structured water and properly structured water, and then also start to drink a bit less. And when you do drink, have things like broth.
I think that's wonderful suggestion. One thing that I've recently kind of figured out, trying to cut out the morning coffee as early. Like I worked on an ambulance for so long, and I've got super addicted to coffee basically. But I'm a huge fan of Jack's and try to follow a lot of what he preaches and says, and so we're always out watching the sunrise. Me, I've got 4 kids. It's every day we watch the sunrise. I find myself wanting that coffee so bad. So actually, this morning, what I did was I got bone broth to try to to kind of limit that caffeine, to have that something hot just for that sensation. And I think that was a big deal. And it goes to what you're saying on the mineral side of things. I never connected that, and I think that's a wonderful suggestion.
Thanks.
with so I just finished up with Thomas Seeger, and he's big into cold. He's got Moroska is his company with the ice baths and stuff. So I was curious on your take because I was going to ask Bill about his experience with that. But something that Tom said was that because of the ice age, essentially, we had to be able to be cold adapted, and the impact of the mitochondria, and it's something that we never experienced. So what you were saying with not having the indoor heating and cooling, the air conditioners and stuff, we got to experience the fluctuations, or swimming in a spring, or swimming in a glacier runoff, whatever it is. So what is the experience you've had with cold or cold water with traveling the world?
Well, some cultures really use cold therapy and others don't. So that's one thing to know. Like when I'm in Mongolia, it's quite the opposite. You don't get in the water. Same with Greenland. You do not get in the green. They will tell you, they'll be like, you will die. Like we will die. You will die. No, you don't get wet. So there are certain cultures that don't get wet. That's one thing to know. But they are getting cold exposure all the time. And they go from cold to heat. And one thing that was surprising to me was that in these extremely cold places, you're rarely actually cold unless you purposely take off layers because the houses are quite warm. Now, that said, I see it everywhere else. I see lots of other places that do it. And the simple elimination of using heating and air conditioning does do that for you. And I've seen it. So even in Greece, my first year there was wonderful in many ways, but temperature wise, it was miserable because I didn't think they had heat in the house. I was certain. And that wasn't the case. They just don't turn it on. And it's actually quite cold. So if you come from America or another place where you're not wearing like really thick wool and natural materials all the time, you would be freezing. And I did an internship in Ohio in this impoverished area, and you live in the house with the people that you're helping, and in this place there's no air conditioning. There's no air conditioning in that whole neighborhood, and it's in the dead heat of summer. We get really hot weather in the summer. I actually ended up loving it. I found that my body temperature adjusted. The first week or so was rough, especially with sleep. You want to sleep on the floor. But then your body starts to acclimate. And I think one of the reasons why we're seeing so much nervous system deregulation is the lack of healthy stressors on our body and the abundance of unhealthy stressors. So a healthy stressor is acclimating to the environment, right? When we're in the cold a lot, and if we have extreme seasons like Ohio does, extreme cold, extreme heat, your body is always acclimating. That helps you build brown fat and all the benefits that we know of, but it also helps to prevent things like Raynaud's, right? And all of these low temperature conditions. Thyroid disease would be another one, right? The last thing people with a low body temperature want to do is get cold. They're already cold all the time, but it's actually one of the ways out if it's done very strategically and responsibly. So the cold or the heat is a very important thing to actually experience. And of course, if we flip it to heat, if we don't get the heat and we don't sweat, that's one of the natural detoxes of the body, right? Our best detox mechanism is actually our breath, but most of our postures and our breathing is so deregulated that then we need the skin and the liver. So there's that too. But I will tell you, where I live in South Africa and also where I was living in Greece, no matter how cold the water is and what time of year it is, even the elders go out every day into the water, and they go out for a long swim. They stay there for a while. So they are getting that even in the hot regions. They're getting that kind of cold acclimation.
Fascinating. It's something that I have always just really despised. Just didn't like being cold. Don't like that at all. And so just really trying to implement, again, this all goes back to Jack, but with his cold thermogenesis protocols and the cold showers, just trying to incorporate that. And it just goes to show that we have gotten so disconnected from just how things were with seasons, and just so disconnected from nature. So what have you experienced on the seasonality of things? Because it based on the equator versus further away where it's a lot more temperate, where are we seeing maybe more health? Is there a correlation there? Is there like a zone latitudinally where there's maybe a little more of a fluctuation, better health, or is it better to be the same all year? What's your experience with that?
I actually don't see a difference. As long as people are living traditionally, it doesn't seem to matter if they're in the Arctic or the equator. They're very, very healthy. Now, with the addition of modern living and modern diets, I do see regions around the equator fall a little faster, but I'd have to compare notes to say if that's actually true, because I know Greenland, the health goes really downhill very quickly as well, and Canada. So no, maybe that's not true. Um, I tend to see extremely good health, regardless of what the traditional diet is and regardless of location. So I was looking into this too, because I was so curious as to how the Arctic communities get through, the polar night where there's no lights
Mm-hmm.
during the day and don't get the sad, don't get all these things. And I just couldn't think it was just from, I mean, I had it on the table as a curiosity, but I didn't think it was just from consuming all the omega-3s and things and vitamin D and A. So anyway, with the more recent light research that's come out, it seems like it's from the fires in the houses. The firelight does a lot of what the sun does. And so they've got that working for them. So I'm not schooled enough in this area to say, but I do know the researchers I've talked to in this area say it's the firelight. And when I've looked into it, it looks pretty solid. So yeah, I haven't seen a difference. Now, I do find it easier for most people recovering to go to a sunny place. There's no question. It's easier to get outside, spend time outside, get light in your eyes and on your skin, which shifts your microbiome, brings down your histamines, all sorts of things. But for those living traditionally, there's not really much of a difference.
Too cool. What about in proximity to volcanoes? So where we throw in more of the magnetism side of it. Do you notice anything on that front?
Oh, that is something no one has asked me before. Hmm. Okay, let me think about it. I spent quite a bit of time in Papua New Guinea around very active volcanoes. The regions in Papua New Guinea around the volcanoes were actually better than the ones away from the volcanoes. That could be the mineral density in the soil as well, because they were not just carnivore; they were mixed diets in those regions that I went to around the volcano. The other regions I've been to with volcanoes, I don't see much worse, but I do see uh, definitely an impact on health once someone is compromised around volcanoes. There's no question because of the VOCs and other things. But even if you look at Sicily, it's quite good. It's quite good on Etna, like very good. Men are very robust.
Yeah.
Still, even with a bit of modernization. So I would have to actually really go in and dive into all of my notes and things to say, but not overtly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. What have you
Cool. I
found?
just think
Mhm.
I think just again, it's all looking at like what's going on with El Salvador and just different areas that have volcanic activity. I think it's just probably something because when and I don't understand it by any stretch, but I think of like the northern lights, right? And like why does that occur and the magnetic side of that? What does it do into health? What's going on with the darkness where there's no light? And so just feel like that's probably something that we don't understand as well as we could and very well maybe like how Dr. Cruz talks about the light. It's just a factor that massively important, but we're not we're not embracing it yet. Um, something else I'm super curious on your take is you'd mentioned brown fat.
Mhm.
What have you found it with it in regards of is there any connection with melanin? Because that's another thing that I'm super passionate about breaking down. I think melanin is vastly important. I think that contributes a lot of these health benefits that we're talking about, and that's kind of the marker there. But what are you seeing with brown fat and melanin?
No question there's a correlation. So better melanin with more brown fat. Definitely see that across the board in modern societies and in traditional as well. Now, traditional are just primarily brown fat. They don't have chubby people. Even if their face looks chubby, right? So a lot of cultures have a very round face, and it can make it look like they're chubby in photos, but they're not. Their bodies are not. It's the structure of the head. But yeah, I do see a real correlation with that. I see a real correlation with the microbiome of the skin and melanin, the quality of the microbiome in the skin. I think that's an area that's by and large looked over, especially for those who are trying to heal or stay healthy. It's a huge area of the microbiome that you can touch right now before changing your diet and other things. And that does change how we handle light, right? A lot of our bacteria communicate through light. So what we have on our skin and the bacteria covering our eyes, incredibly important for resetting the circadian rhythm and those kind of things. And again, typically these things have to be done in conjunction with other things. So there are certainly people that stay healthy and get healthy through light alone or lifestyle alone. But many people have to do the diet as well, or vice versa, right? They can do the diet, not the other things. But when all of it is brought in, you get a very solid state of health, right? So the more of that you can get, the better.
Have you noticed any sort of a correlation in your travels with melanin-rich foods? So some that come to mind are some of the mushrooms, think chaga, or squid ink, or some of like the hyper melaninated like poultry in Asia. Do you think there's anything there with consuming melanin-rich foods and health?
I do think it. Yeah, squid ink is has a lot of benefits to it. So do chaga, but ironically, a lot of the places where chaga is, the cultures don't consume it. Like with the
Really?
yes, yes, and in other regions, the medicinal mushrooms like the reishi, shiitake, those are huge, right? Especially throughout Asia and other regions. So this is a very yes and no answer. Uh, I was with the Sami earlier this year, and up there they really don't eat the mushrooms. That really is a myth. Now maybe the modern ones do, but the traditional ones do not. You have to remember. I should qualify this. For anyone who's not a historian or anthropologist, the Sami go over 4 different countries. So there's 4 different types of Sami. So, but with the reindeer herders, there's not mushrooms consumed. The I see that falsehood printed a lot. So I thought I should say that. That said, other cultures use them extensively. Many parts of Africa do. In fact, I was harvesting some on Kilimanjaro when I ended up getting chased by these huge biting flies that carry sleeping sickness. It was a hilarious video. One day I will post it. But the but and that tribe uses those mushrooms too. So they are used a lot, and I use them a lot with folks when they're ill. I used them a lot when I was ill. They're an amazing tool. Some of them are seemingly better than others. The chaga, I'd have to look at the melanin content for the different mushrooms. Chaga are much higher in oxalates than some of the other ones. This is not always a bad thing. Often people are dumping oxalates too quickly, so the chaga can be used to slow that down. But and it's still a bit of a mystery as to if the oxalate content is actually high in mushrooms. Mushrooms work very differently than the other species. so they'll clean things up and not always hold on to them. But yeah, I do see a correlation.
Too cool. All right, one more thing on just kind of the lifestyle that I'm super curious that I don't feel like I've seen anybody really just dive into and break down. Grounded. How often are people that you experience having really vibrant health grounded?
All the time.
All the time?
All the time. Yeah.
So is that more from being barefoot? Is it from sleeping on the ground?
Both.
What type of activities do they do that cause them to be grounded?
Most cultures sleep on the ground. They also sit on the ground, and they sit on the soil. So if it's a tropical climate, even tropical climates like when I was in Ethiopia earlier this year, there were all these outbreaks, one of which was bilharzia. And it's a horrific condition if you don't know about it, but it's in the soil. So you would normally avoid the soil. And I usually try to follow those things when I'm traveling because I don't have the local microbiome. But when you're with the communities and the tribes, they're all on the ground, and you just forget within a minute or two and end up on the ground too. And it's you're there all the time. Dirt covers everything, but you're not actually dirty. It's not the way we think of it. There's dirt on the ground, on your hands, and that kind of thing, but it's kind of communal. And then many of these cultures sleep on the ground. So many will just lay down a fur mat, and it'll be a very thin fur mat, like think a deer hide. If it's a very hot climate, it'll be a thick one. If it's a kind of temperate climate, it gets a little bit colder. And then the regions that are very cold, so the Arctic, Mongolia, Siberia, this will be different between the different cultures, but in general, it's a raised cot with a lot of fur on top. So the coldness from the ground doesn't come up. Now, there's some exceptions because some of the cultures make carpets and things that they'll put underneath. But in general, they're grounding most of the time. Now, in tropical, subtropical, these kind of climates, typically barefoot. The places I go in the Amazon, they're barefoot. Places through Peru, they're barefoot. And this is in places where they have bullet ants and you see deadly snakes constantly on the trails, but they're fine. So they go barefoot. Regions with a lot of thorns, like the Maasai, they live around enormous amounts of thorns. And so they used to make their own shoes that would actually, but it was just a slide of leather that would tip up, almost like a ski, to protect their toes from the thorns. And now they typically use, even the traditional cultures will use the rubber from a tire that they'll get, because that really protects them from the thorns. But when they're not walking about, when they're in their home camp, they don't tend to wear them. So they're barefoot a lot of the time. I would say that's the most typical. Now, when we go up north, take the Sami, they wear fur boots that don't have a sole. So it's just fur on the bottom, and they wear grass as a sock. So, which is brilliant. Grass or moss. It's more of moss. Because when the moss gets wet, they can hang that over the fire at night to dry. A sock would never dry overnight in that climate. So it actually keeps their feet a lot warmer to not have a sole. So I think that would qualify because that's just fur. Many of the cultures I go to in other regions, like say the Inuit cultures, they wear two different types of boots in the year, depending on the snow quality, whether it's icy or wet snow. And like the seal fur boots that I have, the traditional one would have a leather sole. And they can sometimes have rubber soles now, especially if they're making them and selling them down south. And that's more for the wet season. In places like Mongolia, Siberia, they're kind of like a traditional cowboy boot bottom, and then fur lined inside fully. It's amazing. They feel so nice. And then either horse skin on the outside or yak skin on the outside with more fur, depending on the season. So again, everything's pretty seasonal, but those are always going to allow for that magnetic exchange, with the exception of maybe when they've brought in rubber. I don't know about rubber. You'd have to tell me. But yeah, and so then they're sitting on the ground. They're sleeping on the ground. The only cultures I've seen not sit on the ground would be the Mongolians will have chairs and tables, really the Kazakhs. It's the Kazakhs, really. And that's the primary one. I typically see sitting on the ground, primarily. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Too cool. I just feel like all of these things we've talked about have been omitted from a lot of like the Blue Zone work. I think that all of this is so unbelievably important that we cannot just focus on diet alone. I think all of these factors are massive. So
Mm-hmm.
as we wrap up, something I'd love to get your take on is just kind of cancer in general. Like, what have you seen either traditionally or with your own practice as far as the guidance along that? What are you seeing that helps overcome cancer?
Yeah, I don't find cancer to be as hard, actually. It's that I think it's misunderstood. I think it's like, I was actually just telling a friend of mine who runs a ranch that the treatment of cancer right now to me seems like someone who just caught a wild stallion and then took it to a kid party for a birthday. It's not going to go well, right? It's not meant for a kid party. Now, you take a wild stallion and you give it to a horse whisperer. That's a very different picture, right? I don't see horse whisperers with cancer today, not too many. Dr. Thomas Seyfried would be one. I think a huge issue with cancer is our glutamate consumption, the glutamate issues that people have, right? People with ADHD, most mental conditions, hyper nervous system issues too. So, like fibromyalgia, we're going to have glutamate issues. Glutamate is one of the main foods for cancer, along with glucose. And glucose traditionally was not so much of a problem. There's not cancer in the traditional societies that I go to. It's a thing that we see in cities and in modern cultures, and that's ever growing because we're treating it as some mystery. There's 240 some kinds, and we have to do very targeted treatment. But there's a lot of things in common across, if you take an eagle eye view of what's going on in cancer, right? And there's certain things that it needs. For one, cancer is a natural part of the body, so it shouldn't be a problem. So if it is a problem, you have to look at, why is the immune system not seeing it? Or why is the immune system suppressed? Often it can be suppressed from things that we don't realize are stressors, such as not getting light, such as eating at different times and waking at different times and not getting proper sleep. We so often, when someone gets sick, tell them, oh, you've got to change your mindset. You can't be stressed about things. But the emotional stress is only a small piece. Everyone has emotional stress. And I think we see lots of people with extreme emotional stress that never get sick. What we're missing are all the things that our body perceives as stress that we may not emotionally perceive as stress. And so not having human contact, not having hugs, not having eye contact, having the wrong lighting, all of these things come into play. And actually, the male and female hormone needs are very different. So that's a huge stress that we see today as well. So looking at that, then I like to use things like the mushrooms. The mushrooms are one of 8 different kinds of glyconutrients that regulate the immune system. Actually, now I think they've discovered 9 or 10, but I bring those foods in to regulate the immune system, work on the lifestyle, get them laughing a lot, because laughter has been shown to be so much more effective at getting the immune system revving than other things. So much so that cancer clinics are now, as some of them are mandating these laughter classes, which is hilarious, but it's very effective. It's good for pain conditions too, folks. And it's free. So that's great. And then I like to prevent glutamate blockup. Glutamate is in all the diets, but it's less in some. And then you can consume glutamate blocking things as well. There's a couple of bacteria that block glutamate. L-theanine, the amino acid, blocks glutamate. Green tea blocks glutamate. There's a whole host of things that do. And so you can really bring that down. So the recommendation right now that I see so often when people have gut issues to take L-glutamine, it's not something I would recommend, because there's other ways to get at the gut. And we have such impaired immune systems right now and such an abundance of carbohydrates that cancer is really quite rife. So there's a number of things that I'll do with it, but everything from fasting to get apoptosis, but only intermittent fasting. So we'll get them to a 4-hour eating window, get them into ketosis proper, like medical, to limit the glutamine and feed the immune system. And then lots of green tea, 3 cups minimum a day, and the glyconutrients, and go from there. But yeah, I really find that our immune system is rather deregulated right now. So anything that regulates the immune system and anything that makes your body feel less stress is going to be very beneficial in terms of prevention and getting out of that situation.
Would you say that more of a traditional lifestyle with community and the lower stress, how would you rank that? How would you rank that out of all the things we've talked about?
I would rank it very highly, very highly. I wouldn't rank it as number 1, simply because of what I've seen. When I see modern foods brought in to traditional societies, when they don't change their family structure, they don't change their living structure, their habits, I start to see a depression of health. It's very minor in comparison to us. Most people wouldn't even notice it, I think, if you don't have the eye for it, but that's where I see it. So I can't say that it's just that keeps us healthy, but that is the biggest piece that we are missing today. And so I think that makes the biggest change for us. Really on top of diet today, I would put that. We've seen it in some of the big studies on Alzheimer's back in the day. They used to go to convents because nuns have the same habits, and they could see the difference between those that went to the bingo nights and all the community things and those that didn't. There really is a huge difference, and so if you do the two together, it's a pretty good slam dunk, and that is the piece that is typically missing. Because honestly, when you get sick, your friends and family drop off. They really do, and you can't join, right? A community is really something that you join. It doesn't come to you. And when you're ill, you can't really join. You're too sick. Most people are. It's not like the movies where people have a diagnosis and they go on roller coasters. Like, people are too sick to go anywhere. So it is a bit of a pickle, and I don't know how we're going to solve that one, but it is very necessary. The bigger impact, I would say, on the community breakdown is on our children. The things that bonding hormones need from children are utterly being ignored right now, and not on purpose. People don't know how important they are. They don't even know about them. The bonding hormones that you give your children is very different than your wife does. And those get really broken when people leave the house for 8 hours a day and other things. And we don't have the aunts, and we don't have the extended family. So there's a lot going on right now that alone being fixed would then really create healthy children, which then are more sturdy to withstand our modern society. But right now we're doing the opposite.
Fantastic. Well, Mary, I have absolutely loved the conversation. Love the work you're doing. Where can we send everybody to learn more about what you're doing and to, stay up to date?
Great. Head over to maryruddick.com. Super simple. And if you want to catch me on YouTube, same thing. Instagram is Mary Queen of Hearts, but everything links back to my website. So super easy.
Thank you so much for the time and sharing. And I love what you're doing, and excited to just continue to follow along.
Oh, thanks for having me. And thanks for the great questions. I'm going to go look some of those things up. I'm super curious now.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us in the Sowing Prosperity mission. If you like this content, like and subscribe, share with your friends. Be sure to check out sowingprosperity.com. Sign up for the email. We've got so much more work to do.